The 4th of December, 1950. Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. The frigid Korean mountains lay silent as the sun sank behind snow-capped ridges. Then, a column of smoke spiraled upward. An F4U Corsair had been hit. U.S. Navy Ensign Jesse Brown, the Navy's first African-American aviator, fought to free himself from the crumpled cockpit as sub-zero winds swept across the wreck. High above, fellow pilot Lieutenant Thomas Hudner made a life-or-death decision. Against every rule of carrier aviation, he rolled his own Corsair into a steep descent, dumping fuel and ordnance before deliberately crash-landing beside his friend to attempt a rescue. That desperate scene captured the spirit of the Vought F4U Corsair, a fighter built for extremes, piloted by men who matched its audacity. Known to enemies as Whistling Death, it was more than a weapon, it was an engineering triumph. With its huge Pratt and Whitney, R-2800 radial engine, a 13-foot propeller, and signature inverted gull wings, the Corsair was the first U.S. single-engine fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour, setting new benchmarks before America had even entered World War II. From the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal to the icy skies of Korea, the Corsair became a legend. It destroyed more than 2,000 Japanese aircraft, flew over 64,000 missions, and delivered close air support that saved untold lives during Korea's toughest battles. Even as jet fighters emerged, the Corsair kept flying, proving so adaptable and lethal that Allied nations would operate it into the 1960s. From daring design and relentless testing to brutal Pacific dogfights and heroic moments in Korea, the Vought F4U Corsair proved unstoppable. Forged in innovation and hardened in war, it became more than a machine, it became a legend of speed, power, and unbreakable spirit. This is the story of the Whistling Death. In February 1938, the U.S. Navy demanded a fighter faster and more powerful than anything in the air, able to fly 1,000 miles, stall below 70 miles per hour, and carry heavy guns and bombs. Vought aircraft, led by Rex Beisel, answered with a daring design built around the massive Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder engine delivering over 1,800 horsepower. To clear a giant 13-foot propeller without long landing gear, engineers created the distinctive inverted gull wing, giving the plane its unforgettable silhouette. The prototype XF4U-1 first flew on May 29, 1940, becoming the first U.S. single-engine fighter to exceed 400 miles per hour. Combat lessons from Europe quickly reshaped the design. Vought added 6 50-caliber machine guns, self-sealing fuel tanks, and extra armor. Relocating the main fuel cell to the fuselage stretched the nose and pushed the cockpit back, hurting visibility but adding power and range. By June 25, 1942, the first production F4U-1 was airborne. With record speed, heavy armament, and rugged construction, it earned a fearsome nickname from Japanese pilots, Whistling Death. The Corsair was ready for war, even if its first battles would be against the challenges of carrier operations. By September 1942, the Corsair's radical design revealed serious flaws in carrier tests. Its long nose and rear cockpit blocked the pilot's view on landing, while abrupt stall behavior and a tendency to bounce hard on touchdown made deck operations dangerous. Many Navy pilots nicknamed it the Hog, favoring the easier-to-handle Grumman F6F Hellcat, even though the Corsair outperformed it in speed and firepower. The Navy initially restricted the F4U to land-based service, handing it to the Marine Corps, which quickly recognized its potential for Pacific air battles and ground support. Vought engineers and Navy test pilots worked relentlessly to refine the design, strengthening landing gear, adjusting the tailhook, and teaching a curved landing approach to improve visibility. By 1944, these improvements convinced the Navy to certify the Corsair for carrier duty. Meanwhile, Marine squadrons had already proven the aircraft's worth, flying daring missions from island airstrips and achieving an unmatched kill ratio. What began as a troubled hog was now poised to dominate the skies. The F4U Corsair first entered World War II combat on February 12, 1943, when Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 124, commanded by Major William E. Gies, launched from Henderson Field on Guadalcanal, Their mission escorting a US Navy PBY Catalina rescue flight seemed routine until Japanese A6M0s descended in force. 2 days later, the Marines engaged nearly 50 enemy fighters in a furious dogfight. Pilots quickly learned that the Corsair could outperform the Zero in nearly every way except low-speed turning and climb. First Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh, a former enlisted pilot who would later become an ace, recalled, "The F4U could outperform the Zero in every aspect except slow-speed maneuverability and slow-speed rate of climb." It took time, but eventually we developed tactics that overcame any shortcomings. When we were accustomed to the area and knew our capabilities, there were instances when the Zero was little more than a victim. From those early missions, the Corsair's reputation soared. Legendary Marine units such as VMF 214 Black Sheep, led by Greg Pappy Boyington, and the Navy's land-based VF-17 Jolly Rogers used the fighter to devastating effect. Armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns and capable of carrying bombs and rockets, the Corsair became both a superior air-to-air combatant and a fearsome ground attack aircraft. By war's end, the results were staggering. In the Pacific, Corsairs shot down over 2,100 Japanese aircraft while flying more than 64,000 missions. With just 189 combat losses, a kill ratio that dwarfed expectations, its ability to carry bombs and rockets made it equally deadly in ground attack roles. Originally limited to Marine airstrips because of landing difficulties, the Corsair finally earned full carrier qualification in 1944 after landing gear and approach refinements. This breakthrough allowed it to operate seamlessly with the fleet, sharing the front lines with the F-6F Hellcat in the last brutal island-hopping campaigns across the Pacific. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the Corsair stood not only as a war-winning machine, but as a symbol of technological daring, a fighter whose speed, firepower, and durability redefined naval aviation and set the stage for its remarkable second act in Korea. December 4, 1950, Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. The Korean winter had turned the mountains into a frozen fortress when Ensign Jesse Brown, the US Navy's first African-American aviator, led his F4U Corsair on a mission to strafe Chinese troops threatening the surrounded UN forces below. Flying barely 1,000 feet above the snowbound ridges, Brown's aircraft suddenly shuddered. Enemy small arms fire had pierced a vulnerable spot in the engine. His Vought F4U Corsair, famed for ruggedness, normally absorbed heavy punishment, but this time the engine quit, forcing Brown to crash land on a rocky slope. The impact crushed the forward fuselage and bent the cockpit frame, trapping his legs. Smoke curled from the wreck as temperatures plunged. Circling overhead, Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Hudner and fellow VF-32 squadron pilots feared the worst until they saw Brown weakly wave. Knowing a rescue helicopter was at least 15 minutes away, Hudner made a daring decision. He would try to save his wingman himself. Dumping fuel and ordnance, he intentionally crash-landed his own Corsair beside Brown's, a move almost unheard of in naval aviation. Together with the arriving Sikorsky H-5 rescue helicopter pilot, Hudner battled to free Brown, but the mangled metal held fast. As daylight faded and the cold deepened, Brown drifted in and out of consciousness. They even debated cutting off his trapped leg, but could not bring themselves to do it. With darkness and enemy troops closing in, they faced the grim reality. Brown could not be saved. Back aboard the carrier USS Leyte, Hudner pleaded to return with tools or explosives to free Brown's body, but commanders refused, fearing ambush. Brown died where he fell, his sacrifice immortalized. For risking his own life in the attempt, Thomas Hudner received the Medal of Honor, the first awarded in the Korean War. This single act of courage became a defining story of the Corsair era, proof that the aircraft was more than a weapon of war. It was a symbol of loyalty, sacrifice, and the human spirit at its bravest. When the Korean War erupted on June 25, 1950, the F4U Corsair was already a veteran of the Pacific, yet it was far from obsolete. Just 8 days later, the US Navy launched 16 rocket-armed F4U-4B Corsairs from USS Valley Forge, striking airfields and rail yards around Pyongyang without a single loss. Their speed, heavy payload, and ruggedness made them ideal for the conflict's demanding missions. The need for close air support quickly became urgent. Early joint missions faced problems with radios, maps, and coordination, but the arrival of the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade changed everything. Trained in combined arms warfare, Marine pilots and ground forces refined a system of direct radio contact and rapid response. Corsairs could be overhead within minutes, delivering precision strikes with rockets, bombs, and 650 caliber machine guns. During August 1950 alone, Marine and Navy Corsair units logged 6,575 combat hours. At the pivotal Battle of the Pusan Perimeter, Marine Aviation Training Support Group 33 flew 1,511 missions, including nearly 1,000 urgent support sorties that helped hold the last UN foothold in the South. The ability to base Corsairs on escort carriers like USS Sicily and Badong Strait put them close to the front, maximizing speed and firepower where troops needed it most. As the war shifted north, Corsairs supported the Incheon landings and the dramatic breakout from the Chosin Reservoir, flying continuous orbits by day and coordinating with night fighters after dark. They used multi-channel radios and phosphorus rockets to mark and attack targets with deadly accuracy, even in extreme weather. The Corsair's versatility extended to air-to-air combat. On April 1, 1951, Captain Philip DeLong downed 3 enemy aircraft during a single mission from USS Bataan. That September, Captain Jesse Fulmar and Lieutenant William L. Daniels fought off 8 MiG-15s, each side losing 1 plane. Navy pilot Lieutenant Guy P. Bordelon Jr., flying an F4U-5 night fighter, became the Navy's only Korean War ace, shooting down 3 Soviet-built La-11 fighters. Through thousands of sorties and countless close support missions, the Corsair proved it could carry heavier loads and stay on station longer than early jets, saving lives and shaping the outcome of key battles across the Korean peninsula. By the time the guns fell silent in Korea, the Vought F4U Corsair had earned a reputation few piston engine fighters could match. From its first combat flight in 1943 to its final missions over Korea, the Corsair proved to be fast, rugged, and remarkably adaptable, outliving many of the early jet fighters meant to replace it. Its nickname, Whistling Death, coined by Japanese pilots during World War II, reflected both fear and respect. Powered by the mighty Pratt and Whitney R-2800 double Wasp and armed with 650 caliber Browning machine guns, the Corsair's design blended speed with punishment-absorbing strength. Those qualities allowed it to transition seamlessly from air superiority duels with Japanese Zeros to low-level rocket and bomb attacks against entrenched Chinese positions a decade later. The Corsair's production run told the same story of success. Between 1942 and 1952, Vought and its partners built 12,582 aircraft across 16 variants, the longest production life of any American piston engine fighter. Even after US service wound down, other nations kept the Corsair in frontline duty. France used it in Indochina and Algeria, New Zealand operated it in the Pacific, and several Latin American air forces flew Corsairs into the late 1960s, demonstrating a longevity rare in military aviation. But the Corsair's true legacy goes beyond numbers. It embodies an era of rapid innovation, where designers solved seemingly impossible challenges like mounting a 13-foot propeller on a single-engine fighter, and pilots turned those breakthroughs into battlefield victories. Its service during 2 wars also carried deeply human stories, from the Black Sheep Squadron's daring Pacific raids to Jesse Brown and Thomas Hudner's heroic stand at Chosin, moments that fused technology and courage into history. Today, preserved Corsairs roar skyward at air shows and rest proudly in museums around the world. Each gleaming gull wing recalls a fighter that bridged the gap between piston power and the jet age, a machine whose adaptability and combat record ensure its place among the greatest warplanes ever built, a true legend of the skies.